Hi there, and thank you for downloading this free podcast about functional training. My name is Leander and I will be your host in this series of podcasts I am doing for functioneeltrainen.be, where I'll be interviewing the greatest experts on human movement and functional training. I feel lucky that I had the chance to talk to industry leaders like Gary Gray, Mitchell Dalcour, Erwan Lecor, Justin Price, and many others. I've got a lot of great interviews lined up for you guys, and they will be coming online over the next few weeks. It's been a very interesting experience talking to all these people and learning so much from every single one of them. If you are a trainer or a physical therapist, I am absolutely sure you will like these talks, and they will be a great source of information that you can use in your own practice with your own clients. If you have any remarks or questions about these talks, you can easily reach me by commenting the Functioneel Trainen Facebook page, and I will be happy to communicate with you. Today I'm talking to Frank Forencich. Frank is the founder of Exuberant Animal and could be seen as the father of play-based fitness. Frank has written several philosophical books on lifestyle and movement and is a master of martial arts. He's also a popular speaker on sport and nutrition conferences. I'm talking to Frank about neuroplasticity, paleo and its effect on our modern lifestyle, Crossfit and its competitive atmosphere, barefoot running and how to integrate it in a training program, and much more. Definitely an interesting talk here. Okay, so let's go and hang out with Frank. Thanks so much for doing this interview. I have to say, I was really looking forward to talking with you since I have most of your books and I really enjoyed reading them. You have a very special take on human evolution and health and of course movement and sports. I'm psyched to talk about you after reading all those hours and enjoying your work. Thank you so much.
Good.
Could you tell us a bit more about your work and what you do as the founder of Exuberant Animal?
Right. Well, my background is in martial arts, and so that was my first love. I played sports in high school and college a little bit, but then I got involved in martial arts, and that was my big love. And I did karate for about 7 years, and then I got involved in Aikido, and I did that for a long time as well. And that put me on this path to really wondering about the nature of the body and what kind of movements are best for us. And at the same time, as an undergraduate, I was studying human evolution, and I was so turned on by that I said, I really have to go to Africa. So I went to Africa a few times, studied human evolution, and now I've been bringing a lot of these things together. When I go out, I teach seminars for different groups, sometimes corporate, sometimes trainers, that sort of thing. And we do a real special experience where I give presentations about the history of the human body and some aspects of health, but then we also do functional movement and team building and play-based fitness. So it all kind of fits together in one package.
Okay. In your book, Change Your Body, Change the World, you talk about the difference between exercise and movement and how the way we look at the body influences our health. Could you shed some light on why this modern form of training and look on the body that we have is becoming more and more of a problem?
Yeah, well, I really like this distinction between exercise and movement. Mm-hmm. And this is something that came to me when I started reading some of the history of exercise and realizing that you can only go back so far. I mean, it depends how you want to define things, but exercise might be a few hundred years old, or maybe a few thousand if you go back to the ancient Greeks, or if you consider yoga a form of exercise, well then maybe that's how old it is. But that's really not very old. I mean, if you look at the history of the human body, we are at least several million years old.
Yeah.
And all of that time was movement. It wasn't exercise. When I went to Africa, I went out with the Hadza Bushmen, and they weren't doing exercise. And I've been to Gombe, Tanzania, and I've been out in the forest with the chimpanzees, and they don't exercise either. Yeah. They play, they hunt, they groom, they explore, but they never exercise. So the lights started to go on for me. I thought, well, why do we need to exercise then? And so now this brings up a whole host of questions. It's like, well, do we really need to exercise? Or is it the case that now we're in this sedentary culture, this modern world, so maybe we do need to exercise, but can we make it consistent with our history? And that's the big question right now is what do our bodies really want to be doing?
And it's funny you mentioned that, because just the other day I was walking into this classical kind of fitness center, seeing all these people on these machines, not smiling at all. And what I then see is that people come in and they are really stressed out, and instead of going out relaxed, they're still stressed, but now they're tired as well.
Right.
So the other aspect of this movement, of this exercise, is that there's a lot of repetitive motion going on. Could you talk more about how this affects the brain formation and what effect this has on our body?
Right. Well, I think you hit on a great distinction here, because in the world of functional training and athletics, there's several guys in the States here now who really talk about this distinction between adapted and adaptable. Mm-hmm. So an adapted athlete is somebody who can do one thing really, really well.
Yeah.
In a certain environment that doesn't change.
Yeah.
And that's typically a sport. But an adaptable person, an adaptable athlete, can do many things well and has the ability to change and flow if conditions change, which they always do, right? Life is always changing. Mm-hmm. So that I think is a really useful distinction. And you really only have to look at the kind of injuries that people are getting now, because there are so many overuse injuries, especially starting with younger and younger kids, people who take sports to the level of lots and lots of repetition. Now, repetition is important for learning, absolutely, but we get carried away, we do too much, and we wear those grooves in our body too deeply. So I think play and diversity are really important too.
You talk about play. Obviously, you are an advocate of play with all the things you do with Exuberant Animal. A lot of trainers are afraid of implementing it in their training programs. Right. A lot of times because they are scared of their clients moving naturally, but thereby also increasing their chances of injury, because the trainer himself has less control over the movements their clients do. So how would you advise trainers to implement this kind of training games in their training programs with their clients?
Right. Well, it's a tricky balance, and you can go too far with play and things can get silly, things can get dangerous, things can get so playful and so spontaneous that you lose the training effect. Mm-hmm. And so you can definitely go too far on that side. But I think if you start with discipline and you start with a functional base, a functional platform, and then expand it into playful movements, then you're in really good position. You know, you start people with really light medicine balls and show them some basic movements that incorporate bending their knees and using their core to move the medicine ball around. And once they're comfortable and confident with that, well, now we can get a little bit playful with it. So it's a progression.
Okay, so if I understand it good, you have to start with little movements and then progress and start adding like functional tools and create more uncertainty. I'm sure you're familiar with Michel Dalcourt, the creator of Viper. A few years ago, I did a session with him where we talked about there are 4 components of a good game. One being certainty, like kind of the rules that make the game, because without certainty, there is no game and everything is in uncertainty. Right. Uncertainty was the second one, because that's what makes your game fun.
Right.
And then he talked about the third one, it's the role between players. So trainer-client, or 2 players who play with each other. And then the fourth one was the significance between the players. So what's your take on this kind of theoretical analysis?
Oh, that's a great model. I think that's ideal because what happens is you start from a highly secure, controlled environment, and then you add uncertainty and you add instability, which forces the whole neuromuscular system to adapt. And now you have to organize yourself in this chaotic environment, and that's not only challenging, but it's really fun too. Yeah. So the surprise, the novelty turns on dopamine in the brain, and now you become more interested in the process. So it's not only fun, but it's self-motivating. You want to play the games, just like kids want to play the games, and you love it.
Yeah, it's really fun.
And you don't need all the artificial motivators like the loud music or the mirrors or all that stuff, because the motivation is in the movement.
You talked about the influence of play on the human brain. Could you link this to neuroplasticity? And could you tell trainers more about neuroplasticity and what it is and what it does and why it's so important for the human body?
Right. I love this subject because I think we're about to enter a new golden age of training. What we saw throughout the 20th century was this dogma, this assumption that people are born with a nervous system that's basically static, and it doesn't really change that much over the course of our life. And the problem with that was that we would see good athletes and we'd say, well, they're talented. They were born that way. They had these certain gifts. Yeah. But now we're starting to realize, well, that's not really the case. It just means that they may have had a little bit of talent, but really the emphasis, they worked really hard. They trained really hard, and their nervous system adapted to it. They probably started training younger or earlier. So now the whole emphasis is not on nature, but on nurture and training, developing the body. We can do just about anything we want with our brains and our bodies. So that really opens things up. And we know the formula for neuroplasticity. We know that we can, by doing repetition, we can do what's called long-term potentiation of the synapse. The synapse becomes more sensitive the more you use it. So the phrase that you hear all the time now is circuits that fire together, wire together. So you run a certain circuit in the brain, the more you do that, it actually tends to cohere and become more of an integrated unit.
So you are convinced that everybody has the ability to perform certain movements as long as they train and try over and over again? They will become better.
The limits are basically wide open. I mean, we don't know how far people can go. Obviously, there are some limits. I mean, if you're only 5 feet tall, you're probably not going to make it in the NBA. I mean, there are certain limits. But and obviously, neuroplasticity is more powerful in young people than it is in older people. But still, if we train hard, and if we have a high contrast between training and rest, then there's almost nothing we can't do.
You talked about how neuroplasticity is important in young people. I remember your talk of the Training the Whole Person conference you did with Gary Gray, I think it was. Where he talked about how our system of education, where kids sit along all day and don't move at all, how do you think it influences our ability to move as a child?
Mind and body are so intimately connected that it stands to reason. It makes total sense to us now when we're talking about moving the body is going to have an influence on the mind and how effective the mind is. But for a lot of people, this is kind of a new idea because we come out of a Cartesian culture. We're still living with the legacy of the philosopher Descartes, who said that mind and body are two separate things and that you can basically leave the body out of it and just train the mind. But now we know Descartes was totally wrong about that, and that the body has to be involved if we want the mind to come along for the ride. So to take kids and sit them down in school for a long period of time, it not only compromises their their physical performance and their ability to move, but it also compromises their academic performance too. So we know movement is essential for everything that we do. We're designed to move.
Yeah. Would you advise parents to choose a variety of sports for their children?
Yes.
Do you think this is important?
Yes. A lot of people agree now that the professionalization of youth sports is going too far, where we're taking kids who are 8, 9, 10 years old and training them how to throw a fastball and using the same kind of training programs that we're using with college level and professional athletes. And it's totally inappropriate. So it's better that kids have a diverse set of movement experiences, and they can run that. I mean, I remember the days when we used to play football, baseball, and basketball all in the same day, on the school ground, and nobody does that anymore. So
yeah, that's true. All kids are looking at iPads, surfing the internet, using Facebook. Yeah. So what interests me is how the emphasis is always on repetitions and competition as kind of a motivator for people to do sports. I see this also in this wave of CrossFit that's becoming immensely popular.
Right.
What's your take on this? How do you look at this sport? I think it's very interesting that they use a lot of natural movements like pull-ups, and they kind of got back to the weightlifting and more functional way of movement. But what's your take on this sport?
Yes, I'm a little bit skeptical of competition, and I understand that for some people in some environments it works and it can be healthy, but it also has a dark side. It also has a shadow side, and especially if you look at it in terms of human history. We evolved in tribes, and if you're a tribe member living in a wild, natural environment, your first and most important thing is to cooperate with your tribe members. I mean, that's what's keeping you alive. Yep. So we have an ancient history of cooperation with each other, and I think what happens when competition gets too intense is that it overwhelms everything else, and you can create some amazing adaptations by pushing people to that level, but there is a downside. My background being in martial arts, I'll tell you about my dojo. Yeah, we had a little bit. I had a great sensei, and he was very. He ran a wonderful dojo. There was a little bit of competition, so we would spar with each other, and he was very good about keeping it at a modest level. So we would spar with each other, but it was always the focus was on personal growth and personal development. Okay. And sure, have some fun, play and spar, winner, loser, flag up, flag down, whatever. That's fine, but keep the focus on your own personal growth. And that tended to work. Things changed when I started to see more competition in the martial arts, and it became a different game after that. And not as satisfying, I don't think.
Do you think it's a natural thing we need to sport, looking at our evolution?
Sports are great. Sports can go too far. Yeah. And for me, my primary interest is in group exercise classes, group movement classes, and I love the martial art model. I love the yoga model too, because getting people together, moving their bodies, maybe a little bit of competition, sure, that's fine. Yeah. But getting people together. And, CrossFit has definitely some success to it. But we have to be careful as well. So I think there's also a lifespan arc that we can talk about too. There's certain activities that are more important at different phases of our life. Yeah. So if you're a young person and you're in your 20s and you really have this urge to compete and do sports and really excel, well, sure, do that. But later on in life, things are going to change, and you're going to find yourself with the urge to give back to your community. And then you want to become a coach, you want to become a teacher, and you want to help people to develop their bodies and develop their health. So it kind of depends where you are in your life, too.
Okay. We talked about how the classical vision of fitness on the body, training every muscle separately and really focusing on each specific muscle during training programs is actually not the right kind of way to look at a body. Me myself, you see, I'm an advocate of the tensegrity model. Of Thomas Myers. I love it. So what interests me in this model is that if you look at it, there's not really a core.
Right.
So while in classical exercise, there's a lot of emphasis on training the core. And what's your take on the importance of core stability?
I think it is important, and I think people have just gone insane with it because number one, a lot of people think core training is a way to make your torso look really sexy. And, okay, that's great. I mean, people want to look good. That's fine. But once you can feel your torso and you can feel your abdominals, then you've gotten to where you need to be, and you can feel how the hips can talk to the shoulders. And that takes maybe a few months of training or whatever it is. It doesn't take forever, and you don't have to keep doing it until the end of time. But if you can feel, wow, when I squat, my hip can transfer the force up through my torso to my shoulder, and so now my arm can be talking to my leg, and mission accomplished. So I don't think we need to lay on the ground and do 1,000,000 sit-ups, for example. I think functional training works.
I noticed you talked about looks, and there's a lot of emphasis on look in our modern society. How do you see this influencing the way we talk to each other and the way we communicate? Does this have an impact on us? I know you talked about it in your book, so I would like to hear some more about that. Appearance is such a tricky thing because everybody wants to look good. But if you look at in terms of human evolution, things like cameras and mirrors and video, all of this stuff is really new. And if you grew up in a typical ancestral primal environment, you would have gone your whole life and never really know what you look like because there's no mirrors. You live out in the grassland, there's no mirrors. And maybe there's a pool of water and you might go down and drink some water out of the pool and see a reflection of your face. Maybe. But you would go your whole life and not even know what you look like. You would know what other people look like, but there wouldn't have been this emphasis on appearance. And I've read a lot of books of anthropology and looked at some of the early photographs of hunter-gatherers, and they look healthy, they look fine, but they don't look spectacular. So our emphasis on appearance, it's really turned into an obsession, and it's unhealthy for a lot of people. So in what way do you think it changed our way of communication? Like, it's like Facebook something that could be linked to this? Right. And it turns our focus onto ourselves and away from tribe. And the people who study narcissism, the psychologists who track these things and study narcissism, throughout the 20th century, there's been this rise in narcissism and this shift away from a tribal or a social mentality. And more people feel like it's all about me, it's all about my welfare, and if I can take care of myself, then that's all that really counts. And we do see this in the fitness world, and it's sad because we do need to be turning our attention back onto each other. And I think this is where trainers can really make a difference. Say, look, let's get together in a group and move our bodies together. So could you link this to social neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology? Right. I love these subjects now because they are so interesting and so timely. And to make a really long story short, I'll explain how this works. The body is actually a lot bigger than it looks. And we are so incredibly sensitive to other people's postures and other people's facial expressions that it actually affects our metabolism, our tissue, our endocrine system. And here's how it works. When you look at another person, you're registering with mirror neurons in your brain. Now, the mirror neuron system is really fascinating because mirror neurons
are motor neurons, but they also fire when we observe movement of other people or even other animals, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. So you see other people moving their bodies, and you start setting off the mirror neuron reactions. But it doesn't stop there. You can run a simulation in your brain of what another person is feeling. Yep. So if you look at another person and their body is like this, the mirror neuron system will actually transfer that sense of emotion into your body. Yep. All this stuff is super contagious. So now from mirror neurons, it goes into your limbic system, the emotional system in your brain. So you can feel their emotion to some extent, but it even goes deeper down through the vagus nerve into your guts. So now your guts begin to have an experience of this social connection you have with this other person. So now your whole body begins to resonate and to feel what this other person is feeling. And it's really fascinating how sensitive we are to other people. And this is something that people in the world of drama and theater, acting, they've known this for a long time. And most of the rest of us have forgotten this, but we were incredibly sensitive. So if we spent all our time just paying attention to ourselves, we lose this ability to resonate with other people. And I think it's a big loss. It's something that it's a use it or lose it system, like everything else in the body.
Yeah, so by working with each other, training with each other, we kind of feel how the other one feels.
Yes.
And we start to understand and try to mirror ourselves and our feelings to the other one. So is this where play is such an important factor?
Right. Play is really important there. I think touch is really important. That affects the hormonal system. When you touch another person in a safe way, oxytocin levels rise in the brain, and so that's an antidote to some of our stress hormones. It promotes social bonding and affiliation. These are all really good things. Yeah. So it's a very rich subject.
Of course, touch is another thing that's almost dead in our modern environment.
Right.
So how does this affect our bodies?
Well, there's the oxytocin system for sure. And I think it just generally promotes a sense of safety. Now, this is something I learned in my martial art dojo, because we learned how to grab each other and touch each other in a safe way, and that was a great place to begin.
Okay.
But then years later, I went to massage school, and massage school, of course, it's all about touch, but it's all about touching people in ways that are safe and non-threatening, and you can have some incredibly therapeutic effects on other people simply by putting your hand on them.
Yeah.
So this is another area that I think trainers can start to integrate more of this kind of thing into their work.
Yeah, because a lot of trainers are scared of the threat of a lawsuit by touching clients. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough. I really understand that it's tough, especially in a corporate environment where that's one of the first things that they tell people is don't touch anyone. But we have to find a way. We have to find a way to be social. We have to find a way to have some safe contact with each other. And I think that's the future.
Talking about this reminds me of one section in your book about how you compare some people to bonobos and how you compare others to like the chimpanzees. Could you shed some light on this and how you do this comparison?
Right. Well, this is a really fun subject because if people don't know the distinction here, chimpanzees are these creatures, these apes in Africa that tend to be pretty aggressive and they tend to be pretty tribal. But the bonobos look similar to chimpanzees. They live in a different region, a different habitat, and their disposition is different. They're more social. They're more matriarchal. They have a lot of sex, and they tend to be a lot less aggressive. So there's something about the culture and the disposition, probably even the brain chemistry of bonobos, that is much more peaceful than the chimpanzees. And the reason I brought this up in the book is it gives us an option. We don't have to be necessarily aggressive. The bonobo culture, a lot of people describe them as the hippies of the primate. And there's a lot more emphasis on love and human contact, and which is something that we need more now than ever before, I think. So we could take some inspiration from the bonobos.
And both are our forefathers, huh?
Right. There's like this, 98% genetically identical to both of them. Chimps and bonobos very closely related.
Yeah, so this makes me think we should train in the same way.
Possibly. Now, both in the wild, chimpanzees and bonobos are both incredibly healthy and incredibly fit, incredibly strong. So it's that outdoor living and being in habitat and being tribal and eating real foods that I think makes all the difference.
So how do you look at this form of running with shoes? Like, where does barefoot running fit in this story? What's your take on this?
Right. Well, I guess I would have a similar answer to some of your other questions. I think it's fundamentally a good thing, but we can go too far with it as well. And I think what's happened is we're starting to hear more about injuries from barefooting, and we're starting to hear that some people have done too much too soon, which makes sense because a lot of people have been raised in shoes, in footwear, and if you spend 2, 3, 4 decades wearing shoes, and then all of a sudden you try to transfer into barefoot, your feet really aren't in condition for that. And so how would you advise trainers to transfer this shoe technique to a barefoot technique? Yeah, well, I think it's just got to be slow. It's got to be really slow. Unless you're starting with young children who you can raise them in a barefoot environment, I think that would be the ideal thing to do. But most people are deconditioned, and so you have to be really careful and you have to be slow. But that said, I think the advantages are huge because the foot is a sensory organ, just like the hand is, this huge feedback organ that goes right into the brain, and it allows us to know our environment a lot more intimately and to use our feet and our legs in a much more intelligent manner. So if people can do it even for short periods of time, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I really like to talk to you about natural movement. I remember the talk also of the training, the whole person conference that you did with Martha Peterson about somatics.
Right.
I really liked the part where you talked about stretching with her, where she did special stretching. Could you shed some light on why you think stretching the classical way is wrong, or how you stretch? Do you stretch?
Right, yeah. No, I love to talk about this because in the early days of stretching, I'm talking back in the 1970s, when people started getting into this, the prescription was often to put your limb in a certain stretched out position and hold it for like 30 seconds or even a minute. Sometimes you hear this. And of course I tried that, and I got hypermobile in some of my joints, and I suffered some injuries because of that. And now the research is starting to show that people do get injured by this long duration stretching. And that makes sense because, number one, you don't see it in the wild. You don't see wild chimpanzees doing long duration stretching. They just don't do it. And even a dog that does a downward dog, they only hold that stretch for maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 seconds at the most. So it's more something that they do frequently throughout the day for short durations. And it also is consistent with what we know about the neuroscience, because in the muscle belly, you have these stretch receptors that go to the spinal cord, one synapse, and then they turn on a motor response. So the more you stretch, it tends to go the other way, and that's a protective mechanism to keep you from dislocating your joints. So it makes sense that a long duration stretch would possibly be dangerous. Now, if you're a physical therapist and you know what you're doing and you want to do it in a clinical setting, I think that might make sense.
Yeah.
But for the general population to be doing these long duration stretches routinely, I don't think that makes sense.
So would you advise then some kind of ballistic stretching, some kind of mobilization?
Some sort of stretching in movement. So for example, I often reach up and back and here, and this is dancer type stuff, where you're doing short duration, you're getting the strength harmonizing with the stretch. So if I'm doing a big reach here, I'm getting stretch here, but I'm getting strengthening work on the back, the kinetic chain behind me, and that puts it together.
Okay. Do you think SMR, foam rolling, do you think it's useful?
I think the foam rolling thing, I do a little bit of it. I think it can be a little bit useful. But for people with the upper trap trigger points and that whole unhappiness in their neck and everything, I think they need to get up and they need to start moving their shoulder blades, because the shoulder blade wants to move across the back, and there's no substitute for movement. So I get people up, I say, okay, we're going to start swinging your arms, and we're going to get moving, and we're going to get you reaching and do all the anti-gravity exercises, because they're in this pro-gravity posture for so long.
Yeah.
Let's get up. Let's pump the body into the antidote, the antidote for that pro-gravity situation.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the importance of the shoulder blade motion. I don't know if you're familiar with Ido Portal.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And his movement X. He talks a lot about the importance of scapula mobilization.
Yes.
So what's your take on this?
Well, yeah, because the scapula really, it's almost a free-floating bone.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the scapula, the only place it's really connected to the rest of the body is here at the AC joint.
Yeah.
And through the clavicle to the sternum, and that's how it's anchored to the body. But otherwise, it's completely free to float. And it also has this shape, it's almost like a suction cup. So it tends to get glued down to the muscles below it.
Yeah.
And that's what we see in massage all the time, is people, their scapula hasn't moved for a long time because they don't move it. And so now it's just kind of glued down to their body. Mm-hmm. And now when they try and move their arm, the scapula doesn't move, because now it's just the arm that's moving instead of the scapula rotating. So it's almost like we need sensitivity and intelligence in that part of the body, but it goes to sleep. Here we get the sensory motor amnesia in that part of the body. Yeah.
So, like, what kind of exercises would you then prescribe to avoid this kind of bad movement of the shoulder blades? How would you, as a trainer, address this?
Well, I think in general, pulling and climbing types of movements tend to get that. So you're here, even imaginary climbing. If I have a long day at the computer, and I have plenty of those, so I get up and say, okay, I'm going to just pretend I'm climbing a climbing wall. I'm just going to pretend I'm reaching and climbing. And now all of a sudden, let me see if I can feel what's going on back here, pulling down, even a few pull-ups. That's a lot for some people, but you can do assisted pull-ups, or climbing walls are great. Climbing walls are fantastic because you can adjust the level of difficulty, and even for people who aren't climbers, get them on a climbing wall with big holds and say, okay, let's do some of this, and you have to use your upper back then.
Yeah, so you would advise a lot of climbing, pull-ups.
Yeah, and then maybe, if people like medicine ball or dumbbells, this kind of diagonal motion, all of that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you keep your diet clean while on the road, while doing all these meetings, organizing these events, this conference?
Right. Well, I don't have the ultimate answer, to be honest, because I think these kind of activities and this kind of lifestyle is stressful, and there's only so much you can do. I don't think there is one perfect answer, but I try to be an opportunist, which means I look for opportunities for movement and good food whenever I can get them. And if I'm at the departure lounge at the airport, that's not a gym, but I can do some movement there. And I've even gone on some of my long airplane flights to Africa. It's amazing what you can do in the aisles, or in the, just outside the restroom. It's only this wide, but you can get some movement if you want. And so it's mostly about taking the time and looking for opportunities. I do a lot more meditation than I ever have, and I think that really helps to get me out of this chronic loop of activity, and it really helps keep the stress down. So
so try to move as much as you can, and try to create possibilities to move and be creative with movement, I think.
Right. Yeah. And I might bring a small medicine ball with me or a stretch cord with me. That always works. But it's amazing what you can do with just in a hotel room, for example. I mean, you can have a great experience in a hotel room, but you have to want it, and you have to believe that it's important to do it. I mean, otherwise you'll just watch TV.
Yeah. So do you have a specific diet you follow or vision you have on nutrition?
I would say, I would describe what I do as sort of soft paleo.
Okay.
I appreciate the paleo diet, but I'm not a fanatic about it either.
You're not afraid of grains and bread.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of grains. Some of that stuff, but as always, looking for vegetables whenever possible. And clean meats, and there you go. Lots of nuts and lots of water. So that's what works for me.
And how do you think this paleo, this evolutionary diet, affects the way we think about food and affects our modern space of living?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think to go totally to the paleo diet, that is, I think, too restrictive for most people. Because you've got to eliminate like 99% of everything you find in the grocery store if you're on a really strict paleo diet. And for people who have the time and the energy to do that, that's great. But for the average person, that's asking a lot. Yeah. So we got to find a middle ground. Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Robert Lustig.
A little bit.
He talks a lot about how sugar is the great villain in food, and how fructose is the problem we have to overcome in food. So what's your take on that? Do you really think that sugar is the whole problem, or do you think it's more like an habitual thing and people should just eat less?
I think sugar can have drug-like properties, and I think it does release dopamine in the brain, and I think it really taps into the reward system of the brain. But I think there's a lot of variability between individuals too. I think there's some people who it just lights up their brain, and they got to have more of it. And other people, it's not really so dangerous. So it's similar to alcohol, for example, where some people can have a glass of wine and that's fine and it works, but other people know they can't stop there. So personally, I try and cut the sugar back as far as I can. Okay,
I'm looking at my last questions here, Frank.
Yeah.
So what I really want to ask you is, which 3 books would you advise every trainer to read?
That's
a hard one, I know.
That's a really good one. Yeah, it's tough. I guess in the world of exercise, you've really got to read Spark by John Ratey, which I think is kind of the definitive book on exercise and the body and the brain, the whole life perspective on that. Boy, you've really, there's so many that I can't really begin. But the thing I've been tracking lately is the work by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who talks a lot about this interpersonal neurobiology. I really like his stuff. Okay. A lot of good stuff about meditation coming out now. And then my next book, which will be called Beautiful Practice, and that'll be out in a few months.
Okay, okay. Be sure to send me a link so I can do the promo here in Belgium for our Belgian trainers.
I'll keep you in the loop on that. But yeah, if people are interested, I can send a reading list because in fact, I think there is a reading list on my website. Okay. And that's pretty up to date. And then there'll be a reading list in the new book as well. So, yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing. That's about, I heard you talking several times about meditation.
Well, a lot of people now, for example, Dr. Daniel Siegel and some of these other folks who study the neurobiology of meditation are starting to describe meditation as an essential form of nervous system hygiene that really everybody ought to be doing. I mean, it's right up there with brushing your teeth every day. It's that important, and I'm tending to agree. I think it's it's got a bright future ahead of it. And I think more and more people are going to start to do it. Even if you can only do 5 minutes a day, I think it's huge. And it allows us to get a little bit of a gap between stimulus and response and get off the treadmill of just doing stuff all day long. And now there's a chance to actually feel your body, feel your breath, let things go for a while. It can be incredibly powerful.
And how do you do it? Do you have some kind of a process you go through, and how long do you do it?
I'm very simple with it. I have a meditation cushion, and I just sit on that cross-legged, get my posture nice, and then just start observing my breath. And every time my attention goes somewhere else, I bring it back to the breath. And I may have to bring it back over and over and over again. But that's the process, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. Yeah. But I tend to do it after movement. So if I go and I do a movement snack and I'm moving for 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, and then I feel good, that's a good time to meditate. And that's something that I think a lot of trainers could integrate into their sessions. It's like, yeah, let's do the hard, sweaty workout. Now you're just feeling great. Let's take even a couple of minutes to sit and just be really quiet and feel what you're feeling. And that anybody can do that, and it's really powerful.
Okay. So Frank, this was really interesting. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for the interview.
Sure. Well, great talking. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Okay, thanks, man. Bye.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
So that's it for this first podcast. Next up is Brian St. Pierre. Brian is a nutrition specialist with Precision Nutrition. If you have any questions about nutrition and you would like Brian to give the answer, you can just post them onto our website and we will make sure he gets them. To do that, just send us an email or visit www.functioneeltrainen.be and look for the Industry Expert Q&A button. My name is Leo. Thanks for tuning in. Stay fit.